Hello and welcome to today's community call. My name is Ugur and today I'm going to be hosting the community call again. We decided to keep the theme of the last community call where we brought a partner in, mainly speaking Claros, and decided to bring Kadena in. Going to introduce the people that are with me today, which is going to be Dave from the side of API3. Leading the business development side on dApps and platforms. And we are joined today by the CEO of Kadena, Stuart, and also the Director of Engineering, Doug. And yeah, hello and welcome to you guys. And with that small, brief introduction, I'm just going to right away pass the word to you guys and let you guys introduce Kadena to us.
Great, thanks, Ugur. Yeah, we're super psyched to be here. We're at Kadena. Kadena is a scalable proof-of-work blockchain platform. We founded out of the JP Morgan blockchain group in 2016. My name's Stuart Popejoy. I was the director of that blockchain group, and that's where I hired my co-founder, Will Martino. And I've been in technology since the 90s and in financial technology since 2000, building exchange backbones and trading systems. And it was really exciting to move into blockchain at JP Morgan. And then it was even more exciting to spin off and create Kadena, which we really built to solve the problem of how do you bring kind of industrial strength use cases to blockchain, and how do you make blockchain something that can scale to the level that would be demanded by something like a JP Morgan or a NASDAQ or a NYSE stock exchange or things like that. The obvious problems that we saw were that things weren't scalable, that congestion, was obviously, even back in 2016, it was obvious that Ethereum wasn't going to be able to keep up with load. Safety also was a big issue in the sense that you had these, catastrophic hacks happening. So, providing a safer smart contract language was a huge part of the offering, and also a permissioned or private blockchain for fast finality and for enterprise use cases. The whole package becomes what we call a hybrid blockchain, and that's a fancy word for a scalable public blockchain that can use the same technology on a private blockchain for fast finality or for privacy demanding cases. And so we launched our public blockchain in 2020, in January of 2020, with our token KDA. And again, it's a scalable proof of work blockchain, which means that we don't just run one chain. We launched with 10 chains, all sharing the same token. And in August of 2020, we scaled that to 20 chains, and that doubled our throughput, so that we're already, every chain we add, we can scale linearly in throughput. So, and there's no limit on how many chains we can add. So we've basically taken the proven security of proof of work, scaled it so that it can handle any load, and so that's how you avoid things like spiking gas prices, but also just not being able to get your transaction in. And we provided a smart contract language that makes it really easy and safe to do all of the things that are so compelling and innovative in blockchain, whether that's DeFi, lending platforms, NFTs. And so we're super psyched to be working with API3. We love working with smart and agile projects that offer something in kind of an innovative way, and that's what we're all about. So yeah, really happy to be here. Doug, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Doug Beardsley, Director of Engineering at Kadena. I've been programming since I was pretty young, doing software professionally since the early 2000s, and I've been at Kadena now for 3 or 4 years, something like that. And it's really amazing experience to be able to work with a team of this caliber and actually ship some potentially world-changing software.
You want to tell them about your art behind you?
Oh, yeah. This art is an actual nonce analysis from our blockchain from the first, I think maybe 2 months of when we were operating, and you can actually see in the chart when the network was in like CPU mining, and then you can see when GPUs started getting used, and then you can see when FPGAs started getting used. Now we're on ASICs, and it wasn't visually interesting enough for me to include that in the picture, but it's kind of a fun little backstory for that.
Nice. Thanks,
Great.
Gavin Stewart.
Thanks for the great introduction. Yeah.
I can intro myself. I'll intro API3 a little bit just for anyone from Kadena who's watching as well, so they have an idea about exactly who you're working with. So my name's Dave. I've been in blockchain or working in blockchain since late 2017, early 2018. My background was as part of a project called Honeycomb, which was a decentralized API marketplace built on Ethereum. And as one of the founding members of API3, what we wanted to do really was to design an oracle that would enable data providers to get data onto blockchains easily. I think what we've realized is that a big stumbling block to preventing the full Web 2 experience being built on Web 3 is the inavailability of APIs. It's not necessarily just TPS or the blockchain itself. The blockchain developers need the tools to be able to build Web 2 apps in a fully decentralized way. So we have a lot of experience working with API providers, and we designed our own oracle so that a lot of the pain points of existing solutions would be taken out. The first thing that we've used to kind of differentiate API3 from other solutions is that API3 is built as a DAO. It's designed to be fully decentralized so that everyone in the project has a say over the project's direction, and people can vote over what they would like us to be doing next. We see centralized governance as also being a point of centralization. So if you're trusting an Oracle project that governs its oracles and decides who can push data themselves, then that's also a single point of centralization. So at that point, you lose a lot of the benefits of blockchain being trustless. So the way the DAO works is that people will be able to stake API3 tokens to give them a proportion of governance rights, and the staked API3 tokens collateralize an insurance product. Another one of the issues that we felt we had with current Oracle solutions is the lack of quantifiable security. So there's nothing innately you can do to look at a data feed and see like X oracles providing Y data sources. There's no conclusion you can draw with that with regards to how much TVL can be secured. So using a staking pool to give a defined number as to how much of the TVL would be secured in the event of data issues gives you a big benefit there. So users can assess exactly how much of their percentage is at risk, and they can make an informed decision. But also that incentivizes good governance, because the criteria for the data feed insurance paying out is simply that people experienced a loss as a result of a data feed error. With that, good governance is incentivized by people making the correct decisions. If they mess up, then the project users can claim via the project for the money that they lose out. And this is all done by a third party rather than having to trust API3 for it as well. And the last part of the solution was we felt that the best way of creating an Oracle project is having the data providers run the Oracle themselves. And this is the main difference between API3 and other Oracle projects, and even to native oracles. If the data provider runs the Oracle themselves and is able to put data directly on the blockchain, then you miss out the need to have a middleman solution there. And these middlemen, they require either a lot of aggregation between different oracles to ensure you're not trusting any individual third-party oracle, which is quite gas intensive, or they require other structural components to the blockchain itself. But the most important thing about the API provider running the oracle is the uptime should be equivalent to the API itself. We've designed an oracle that can be run in the existing cloud infrastructure that the API uses, so that there's no change in downtime to the API, which is pretty important. And it's also designed to be run so that it can work in their existing business model. They don't necessarily have to use crypto at all for it. They can take payments in fiat, and the requesters top up the wallets. So as an API provider, even from a traditional background, you can still deploy a node, you can still sell data to people who operate in the blockchain space, but you can do it without needing the compliance issues or anything around the crypto side of things. So that's kind of a top-down view of API3. We're decentralized. We have API provider run nodes, and we're providing quantifiable security for the APIs, so projects know exactly how much would be at risk. And for the single APIs as well, we're looking at providing downtime-based insurance to prevent that being an issue.
Perfect. Want to thank both the Kadena team and also Dave for the small introduction, and just wanted to hand you the word again about if you can go into the partnership and what we are trying to achieve pretty much with working together.
Sure, I'll take that. Well, one of the big things we're doing in Kadena is launching, kind of a kind of best-in-class suite of DeFi products. So, for instance, CADEX is launching soon, and that's our multi-chain DEX, AMM-style DEX, and that's designed kind of to be a settlement platform that eventually will live on more than just Kadena. Pact already works on Cosmos, and we have our Core Pact initiative with Polkadot, but Kadena itself is actually a truly multi-chain architecture in itself, in that it's it's crypto primitives keeping all the chains in sync. So that means that when you have a trading venue on one chain and you scale it to two chains, those pools are not the same pool. So when the time comes that a given pool needs to, is getting congested and, we need to scale it up, there's going to be opportunities for market makers to, be rewarded for balancing liquidity across chains. And then that exact same mechanism will be used when CADEX launches on, on a Cosmos chain or on a Polkadot chain. And and another thing about CADEX is that CADEX, because it runs on a efficient blockchain, it can do things that are very hard to do in gas-constrained environments, such as meaningfully address MEV or front-running. The issue in DEX is where a bot can monitor a mempool and see your transaction coming in and basically bracket your transaction before and after to manipulate the price, get you to trade at a worse, trade at a disadvantage, and then unroll that. And they can do that all within one block. Oftentimes working with miners, but you don't even have to work with miners to do this. But it's called miner extracted value because, there's miners on mempools, and you're going to do even better if you have a mempool that you're working with and a miner right there. So, but the way we solve this is by simply tightening the screws on what can be traded once the trade comes in, basically tightening up on slippage. And the reason why you would never do that on an Ethereum platform is that it's so expensive to trade that one thing you would never do is trade less once your trade comes in, because otherwise you're going to spend like, $50, $100 in gas for nothing or for a tiny trade. So, but, my background is in algorithmic trading and equity systems. And the idea that, you come to the market, you don't see the conditions you want, and you just trade your whole order anyways is insane. So what CADEX will do to combat MEV is actually trade out your order for you over a period of time, such that if somebody's manipulated the price, you'll back off. But if you get the price you're looking for, maybe you'll trade your whole volume. And the point being is that you can't do this when gas prices are a problem. You can't do this when congestion is happening, so you don't even know when you're going to trade. So these are the kinds of things that we want to bring to blockchain are, more data intensive things that get you a better experience, or what we call best execution. So along those lines, another thing that can happen in an AMM, in a Uniswap style DEX is something called impermanent loss. And impermanent loss is a kind of funny term that basically says that if you're a market maker and you stake into, you provide liquidity into, say, a pool that's got like KDA and Tether in it, and then KDA shoots way up, great. But the problem is that you're in a situation where it might have been better just to keep your individual positions and not put them in a pool, because the amount of value you have there is essentially has to do with the ratio of what's in the pool. So you can actually lose money. If it goes up or down, you can move money when you pull out. So one of the things we need is a price feed. And since Kadena is an extremely decentralized chain, we're proof of work, you know, the chains themselves operate independently, but, you know, there's more security by having more chains. So the last thing we want to do is engage some kind of critical component that's less decentralized than, you know, the DEX that we're running on chain. And unfortunately, with market data, more often than not, you're actually going centralized. You're going to a single provider, or you're going to some, or you have no, like you're saying, you have no way of knowing what kind of security is behind it. And so some of the things that we can do with the permanent loss is we can do things with the CADX token, KDX, to insure market makers against impermanent loss. And that, because the thing about impermanent loss is that it only emerges if you actually withdraw your funds. But it would, you know, it's nice to know that if you are in some situation where you need to access those funds and it's not the greatest time, you'll still be compensated for, you know, there will be basically a hedge against impermanent loss that gets, because you have the kind of real world price coming through and the ability to see, you know, what your exposure is at any time. So that's that's an example of a very attractive use case for API3 and CADX.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on that part. Is there anything you want to add, Dave or Doug?
Doug, did you want to talk about some of the other things we were looking?
Yeah, we have we were down at Bitcoin 2021 in Miami this past weekend and got into a conversation with Siren about what they're doing with respect to options. And they have some of their infrastructure that needs to calculate Black-Scholes options pricing models on chain. And of course, these calculations are fairly involved. And doing that on Ethereum is expensive in terms of gas costs. And so we're talking with them about the possibility of doing some of those calculations on Kadena, where the gas will be a lot cheaper, which would enable them to do more accurate Black-Scholes approximations than what they're currently doing. And then, of course, this gets into the whole Oracle, how do you move data from one chain to another question? Because if the values are being calculated on Kadena, they still need to use them on Ethereum, where a lot of their other ecosystem is. And so there's some interesting possibilities for collaboration there.
Great. Thanks for elaborating. Dave, something to add?
Interesting enough, Siren is, that's a great new project doing, with a really good way to tackle options in a DEX context, in a truly decentralized context. And the CEO, I think that's her title, is Monica Quaintance, who is of Kadena fame and still works closely with Kadena. So it's a project we're very friendly with, and so we're very excited about collaborating.
Nice. I think what I'd like to add is that the approach that Siren are taking is very similar to the approach that API3 have had for the aggregation for our data feeds, or the APIs, when they go live later this year. We realized that creating a kind of accurate aggregation is difficult on Ethereum because gas costs mean you can more or less only take the median. Whereas if you do the computational stage on a lower gas fee chain, and we've always been planning on XDAI for this, but obviously this is something that I'll mention to the developers, and we'll look at using Kadena or other options, where you can aggregate on another chain with lower gas fees. You can do a much more finely tuned aggregation. So for instance, you might have, say, 3, 4, 5 different exchanges, and you're getting data, price data from each exchange. And taking the median might not give you the best result if you have one exchange that has extremely low volume and one exchange that has a much higher percentage of volume. So you might want to weight the aggregation by the volume metrics from each exchange. And that's a simple example, but it's one that makes a huge difference if you can use the low gas cost chain.
And that would be an interesting application for hybrid as well if you want low latency, because one of the things is about having a fast finality permission blockchain is that you can use that as kind of a middle step and see Kadena as kind of your golden record. if you want. Like, so I would start with Kadena, but start with the public blockchain, because that's you can do everything on there. But then eventually you could actually be kind of computing prices in bulk on the private chain and recording them on the public chain, but you would get a much faster feedback for kind of higher volume data feeds, where people want the price to be more accurate. We're a proof of work blockchain, so our processing times are, while our throughput is unlimited, we can handle any load. The actual settlement time is a typical proof of work settlement time in the order of 30 seconds, and then however long you want to wait to avoid. We have faster confirmation, but that's proof of work. We actually like proof of work for that reason. That's why proof of work is the best settlement platform. But just like layer 2 can help out with these things, something like Lightning Network can help out Bitcoin. The fact that the same smart contract language runs on both means you can have to have all three, because Pact is a truly standalone interpreter. So you could have a web app that computes it in Pact. You could have the same code running on a fast finality and the same code running on a proof of work blockchain, with one code base.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'll chat to the developer team about this and see what they think. The other interesting thing I think here that's worth bringing up in the context of both API3 and Kadena is the kind of sub-DAO scaling model that we're using. So Barak wrote an article on our Medium about this a few weeks ago, but effectively the way that we see scaling across blockchains working best isn't having the API3 Ethereum DAO curating everything for every blockchain in perpetuity, because that's very difficult to scale up. You end up needing a huge team all managed in the same DAO. And it's also important to keep in mind that each blockchain, each specific smart contract deployment is probably best managed by people who are familiar with that smart contract language, that blockchain and that ecosystem, rather than a group of people who've worked on Ethereum for the last age. So for this, we're doing a kind of scaling through sub-DAOs, where once there's an integration on a blockchain and projects interested in using it, we look at forming a sub-DAO that then will take control of managing the integration on that blockchain. And the API3 DAO will be able to pass a proposal to kind of license that sub-DAO, if you will, so that then all of the data that API3 has access to, the sub-DAO will be able to use and create and manage their own data feeds on that blockchain as well. Obviously, API3 will also be building the tooling to help manage this, help make it work. So it's a nice way of scaling laterally rather than having just one team who have to do everything, and also making sure you don't end up with a stale integration that just sits there and does nothing because the main team are too busy to make sure it works.
Yeah, DAOs are something we're getting into this month in Kadena too, and because one of the things that one of the great things about Pact is that it's native to Pact that you can have governance over the smart contract code itself. So you can, in addition to doing kind of typical DAO, kind of proposals or something to operate on data or some kind of business logic, you can also have the community govern whether or not the DAO itself can take on new capabilities, and that's native to the Pact language. So there's no development required for that. I mean, you have to code what your upgrade logic is, like what your quorum is, how you want to like capture votes and all that kind of stuff. But basically, it's the hash of the upgrade transaction can be voted on and then validated in governance, so that you can say the smart contract can only be upgraded to this hash, and then the upgrade goes through or it fails. So it's that, and also the fact that Pact natively supports multi-sig and other, in fact, arbitrary, what we call guards. So the idea being that if you can use one key in Pact, you can use 5. If you can use a key, you could also use a piece of code. You can also rely on the governance of a smart contract to be your security, in the sense that you can say that, well, if you've got governance for a smart contract, that means that the smart contract itself can own funds, and its governance can be used to decide what to do with those funds. But this is one of the things that makes it much easier to consider far more flexible, decentralized custody and governance properties, is because Pact makes it impossible to code around a single key. And while some might be like, oh wow, that's kind of weird, but it just means that a developer is never going to make a mistake and lock you into a single sig model. And if you are in a single sig model, all you have to do is change your key set, and now you can go to a multi-sig or even a much more advanced kind of autonomous regime. And so working with DAOs is something that's going to get really interesting in Kadena, because you're going to see them all over the place, and they're going to be able to really do very interesting things, much like what you're talking about with API3.
And actually, this is kind of an example of, I can't think of the exact term. I'd probably call it convergent evolution, but I guess that's a term from biology rather than technology. One of our partners, Kleros, has a system very similar to what you're describing, where any upgrades to their smart contracts have a 2-week period where people can challenge them, and so they don't actually go through and end up being put into code. And that's managed through their normal kind of arbitration system. But it's a way of, again, not having to trust the developers themselves to push contract updates, but having that verified by the community. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that being built into the protocol level.
Yeah, because I'm very impressed, grateful, humbled by the amazing work that's been done in the Ethereum ecosystem. All the amazing use cases we have today were basically proved out in Ethereum. And, and all the models, at least the base kind of form of every model that is for DeFi or NFTs have all come out on Ethereum. But developers have had to work so unbelievably hard to get us here. Companies like Comp and Maker, and, for all of their brilliance and, top to bottom familiarity with the system, they still sweat if they have to do an upgrade to something that involves governance or anything like that, because it's just, it costs a ton of money, and it's just very hard to, when your developers are having to do that, even if they're the best developers in the world, they just don't want to do that. They don't want to they would rather be focused on business logic, on things that make money. And, again, all the work on the standards has been incredible. The community surrounding smart contracts on Ethereum have done amazing things. And, Pact is really kind of designed with them at heart, because, everybody, when they come to Pact, they learn it really quickly, especially if they've done Solidity. They learn in a couple days. And then things that they had to, blood, sweat, and tears to do are either already available, or you can code in a matter of minutes. And you can just deploy and feel much more secure and basically innovate faster.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. With that being covered, I wanted to jump into one of the pre-submitted questions we had. We have 3 pre-submitted ones, and afterwards we're going to open up for live questions. So if there is somebody in the audience that wants to ask something specific, now is pretty much the chance to drop your question into the comment section. And after we went through the pre-submitted ones, we're going to be picking up from the live questions if there are some that we can answer. Great. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into the first one, which is, when can I start using API3 in my smart contracts on the Kadena network? And you briefly went over it, but maybe we can have it more detailed.
Well, Doug's our director of engineering, so.
And I always refuse to give dates.
Very good idea.
Yeah, I think what's great about API3 is its multi-chain approach. So and multi-protocol, really. It's not just multi-chain. And I think that fits very well with our vision for everything from CADX to multi-chain. So the one thing about our system is that our system is built around kind of standard APIs. All our APIs are very open. A lot of our data types can be expressed in just plain JSON. So it's very easy to integrate with, basically with the Pact system, because that's what Kadena runs, is the kind of Pact application layer. And it's very easy to test. So it's the kind of thing where something that might take 6 months or a year to get into testnet on an EVM chain, we'll be able to, we can do in a matter of weeks. And we've done this repeatedly. We rolled out CADX, and we started development on the project in November and rolled into beta in late January with a completely brand new DEX and without copying and pasting a line of code. So we can't, right? We're not EVM. So soon.
I think something worth adding on to that is the way that API3 works. So having the API providers running the oracles individually means that once we've done the necessary integration work to get Air nodes converted to the smart contracts run in Pact, those Air nodes rolled out to API providers then mean that every API that we have will also be available for people to use on Kadena. So it's not just something that they'll end up with a few APIs. Once we have this work done, then we should be able to start rolling them all out to Kadena. So that you'll see quite a big variety of data once that happens.
And as Stuart was mentioning, with all of the like richer low-level primitives that we have, multi-sig being built in from the ground up, etc., that just speeds the time to get these things deployed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of the things about Pact as well is that it's a very agile language, in the sense that just recently, like 3 months ago, we had developers come on to Pact and say, hey, it would be great to have these particular operations. And the idea is that we're always adding more native, and those are rolling out in a week. And they include things like deduping a list, or things that would cost you a decent amount of gas and are just kind of a pain in the butt to do. In the past, we worked with this project called FinPrint to actually add new cryptographic primitives as natives. And what's nice about that is that we can turn these things around in a matter of months, or in a few months. I mean, in terms of actually getting it rolled out to the production blockchain. And it means that we're always finding ways for stuff to be more efficient. So so if an integration calls for, if we're finding we're doing something very complicated as part of an integration, we have an open process by which that can be turned into a native, at which point that's running in the blockchain code. And, cheaper gas, faster performance. It's funny because this is something that Solidity could do with built-in contracts, but they've been just conservative to the point of basically being anti-competitive, doing things like not introducing new crypto primitives and things like that. And it's really slowed down integration efforts with EVM and other chains. I mean, Zcash has been trying to get Blake 2S on Ethereum since 2016. And it's just not that hard of a thing to do, but they won't do it. And I guess it's largely because of politics, but its effect is anti-competitive. We're the opposite. If you bring us a good use case, or you've got some kind of crypto primitive that's coming from another chain, and you want to integrate with us, it can be a primitive in Pact in a month.
Great. That was pretty much the first question. Thank you for the answer on that one. The second one probably goes a bit to Doug and Stuart. Can you give an example of world-changing dApps that are easier built with this API3 integration into Pact? Because, I had to cut it a bit short. The sentence was going into that Pact already supports native Oracle integrations.
I mean, the one we were talking about was something like, doing hedges against impermanent loss, or even Siren's use case, in the sense that, at the end of the day, people are doing similar things in Pact that they're doing in Solidity, or what they'll be doing on any other blockchain. So, the idea with Pact is to make it easier and safer. And so the idea of having API3 is also to have more data to work with, so that, so you can add more value to a given contract. So something like what Siren is doing is a good example. Like, I'm sure they're not doing a full Black-Scholes. They're probably doing a significantly simplified version of option pricing. But nonetheless, these are the kinds of things that in a congested and gas-expensive blockchain are very hard to do, and in Pact are extremely easy to do. But you need a quality source of market data for that. So, and again, what we're going to be doing with impermanent loss in CADEX is a good example where, we need kind of an independent source of market data so we can see if there's starting to be drift, from real world prices. We can basically start giving market makers hedges to, the name of the game is liquidity is everything in a DEX. So you want to keep market makers happy. You want them to feel safe about keeping their funds locked up in your DEX. And so anything you can do to increase that kind of that hedge. And the best way to do that is do things with real market data, with accurate and decentralized market data. But other kinds of exchanges also, for instance, like the Siren, the exchange on Solana, is an example of an order book exchange, and which you simply can't do without market data. So, a DEX is a whole different animal and doesn't need market data, and that's what's amazing about DEXs, for their fundamental trading mechanism. But something like a traditional order book where you can go see quotes and you can get an idea of, like where the price kind of moves around and stuff like that. You definitely need market data to make an order book kind of application work. But we'll also start seeing things like on-chain hedgers, things that, where people can actually implement an entirely autonomous trading strategy. And, it's almost like you could operate a hedge fund on-chain, in the sense that you could roll out a smart contract. It's got market data, it's got access to CADX, and it can be doing things like managing positions and basically, achieving very kind of like sophisticated portfolio management techniques, but in a transparent way and entirely on-chain. So, these are just some of the things. But honestly, there's, once you start getting into things like NFTs, there's so much you can do when you've got a rock solid bridge out to the real world.
Yeah, and also just to kind of expand on that, those are all fantastic applications. But I think the amazing thing about blockchain is what we can't see right now. Everyone always asks me, "Oh, what can I do?" Well, that's up to you. You're limited by your imagination. Did in the early days of Ethereum, did they imagine the DEX situation and automated market makers? I mean, I could be wrong. I wasn't there, but I kind of don't think so. Did they imagine CryptoKitties and these kinds of like non-fungible assets that people start trading and using for game mechanics? No, I don't think they probably imagined those either. So I actually think the most significant world-changing things we probably haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think something I'd like to mention maybe about dApps that are easy to build with API3's integration into Pact. I'm not sure what extent Pact's native Oracle extends to, but with API3, I think simply providing lots of different types of data is a big thing that we see creating a lot of different apps. For example, with different data about the real world, like flight data, weather data, it becomes quite easy to write things like parametric insurance apps with fairly minimal work involved. So an example of one that was written a while back using a previous project on Ethereum was like a smart contract weather insurance, where you put a place that you want to insure, you put a time that you want to be insured for, and then the back end of the insurance contract decides what price it is. That doesn't have to be on chain, and gives you a price to be insured for that time at that location against rain. And then after the time has passed, if it rained, you create a transaction which simply pings the API or pings the weather data API, queries the rainfall on that date at that time in that location, returns a result, and then that decides whether or not you get paid out. And it can be relatively simple, but even just one small piece of data like that can create new projects and new insurance contracts.
Yeah. Maybe also to elaborate on pretty much the trading that Stuart went into. I think we even have one of our API providers on the Sovereign Hackathon with like social media metrics, if I remember correctly, Dave. And
yeah.
I know a lot of people that trade off of Twitter sentiment, and you could quite literally program that into a smart contract that just trades automatically for you based on that API.
Yeah, I think that's one of the suggested, or one of the project ideas that we gave out was a pool of assets that auto balances based on social sentiment, basically. So if social sentiment around a project goes down, it weights that project less in the total pool that's held. So, and that can be done quite simply with a couple of APIs. So, and you can knit all these different APIs together to create amazing dApps. And like you said, we might not know what the real killer application is. It could be something that we haven't anticipated. And we look forward to finding out. So.
Great. Last one of the pre-submitted ones, very open-ended one, and we covered it a lot, so I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens. Yeah.
It doesn't.
I can answer it. It actually does slightly. So there's an interesting niche of AirNode for interoperability that a couple of projects are using, where they make their DApp usable via an API. So, for example, Option Room are a kind of an Oracle project that are more of a subjective data oracle. So you can ask them a question, and then they have a game theoretical, token economic way of arriving at an answer that people think is correct, and then they return the answer. And with them, although they're based on Polkadot, they're making their protocol queryable over an API so that any blockchain that can run AirNode can query them. So it's a different way of doing interoperability, but it's one that should work. And I think LitEntry are planning on doing the same with kind of decentralized identification data. So there are projects out there looking to use AirNode as an interoperability solution, even though it's not what it was explicitly designed as. And yeah, we look forward to exploring that as AirNode develops.
And I think that highlights some of the things about the use cases, like specifically the Siren use case. And, it's about them consuming data, but then it's also about them producing data. And it's interesting, like in a way, a world of Oracle data where the data you're reading is actually secured on a blockchain. The source is kind of a new thing. I mean, oracles generally are thought of as a way to bring in stuff from the real world, but the idea that a blockchain can be, an unshakable source of truth, at least in terms of, kind of reputability and things like that. That is, that's and it is interop, of course, because, why would you? The interesting thing about Kadena is that, one of the ways that, when we say we natively support oracles, what that means kind of more generally is we natively support multi-chain. So what does that mean? It means that, like, moving something from one chain to another is actually supported by native features in the smart contract language, such that you actually code an interaction as a series of steps. And when one step happens on one chain, you simply yield data to the second step, which happens on the other chain. And so the idea is that you could do this with more than one step. You could actually have steps that go back and forth between chains, that go across 3 chains. And it's interesting things like this, like, one of the things that oracles do less, although I'm sure you've probably encountered some things. Right now, the model of most oracles is push, in the sense that, you're trying to make it so that when a smart contract runs on chain, it has the data it needs, and it can work on that data. But another thing about these kind of native multi-step processes that are safe, because it's also, one of the reasons why it's native is so it's also that programmers don't screw this up and make like a loop or have some kind of problem that would, result in like funds being lost or something like that, is that you can start to do these kind of, more complicated interactions for things like publishing data back out. But interestingly enough, you could get into a, like a situation where you want the Oracle provider to provide a price at a particular time or do a particular calculation for you. And, in theory, you'd even be willing to make a micropayment for it. And then, it goes out to the Oracle, it comes back, and then so that's something where you're doing like stateful interactive interop. And you could even have a marketplace of data where, like, stuff that's harder, questions that are harder to answer, and you want to do them off chain, you can actually put into a process that's entirely captured and, kind of, benefits from the, kind of golden source of truth of the blockchain.
Yeah, I think especially what you mentioned about blockchain being used as a source of truth is really, really interesting, and that's something that there's been a lot of interest around. For example, there's a protocol that we're partnered with who plan on using it to get crypto conversion rates for Web2 iGaming platforms. So if you're paying into a gambling app, like a conventional app, not a blockchain app, but you're charging your account using Ethereum or using Bitcoin or using Kadena, they will give you a conversion rate, and you can then verify this conversion rate based on blockchain. And AirNode allows you to see exactly what API that conversion rate came from. So you don't have to trust that this existing Web2 app is giving you the correct rate. You can verify that on chain. And it's just an example of how sometimes low trust environments, you can create these use cases that otherwise wouldn't necessarily make much sense, because otherwise you're bringing off-chain data on-chain, and then you're taking the on-chain data off-chain again. And that seems a bit circular, but the benefit is that it stays there and it can be verified later on.
Yeah, and the amazing thing to me about all of this is that what Stuart was just talking about the Oracle primitives, they came because we had to solve the problem of transferring coins from one chain to another as a part of our scalability. We've gone back and we've rethought a bunch of the things that we have the benefit of hindsight to rethink. And it turns out that they worked out in the way we wanted, and they worked out in a bunch of other unexpected ways. There's just this really kind of like multiplicative effect of value that we've seen. I can list several examples off the top of my head, and it's just really, really cool to see the emergent effects.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. With that, we pretty much covered our pre-submitted questions. So if you still want to ask something in the live section, which begins now, feel free to drop us a line. Otherwise, if you guys see anything that you want to answer, just go ahead. And if not, we can talk about whatever you want.
I'm just looking at the questions.
Someone's asked, how is API3 better than the Chainlink partnership? I'll answer that quickly. Just have a read of our Medium. It covers the main differences between the projects. So it's a good resource. It's more accessible than the white paper. Yeah, there's a series of articles in our Medium that explains the differences.
There's also a question about hackathons. I'll give a quick answer to that one. It's great to see. It sounds like some other people are wanting to do their own packed hackathon. We also definitely plan to do some hackathons. We've kind of put those off to the side a little bit because of coronavirus and the state of the world. We're waiting to kind of see how things play out there. But I have significant experience before Kadena of organizing hackathons and conferences. And this is like, developers are super important to what we're trying to do, as you can tell from the topics that we've discussed here. And we're definitely going to get those kinds of things. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to learn how to build cool new products that we have not thought of on our technology.
Great.
Yeah, and one thing that comes up a lot when people talk about oracles, and it's really for gaming, is a source of randomness, which I'd be interested to hear from you guys if you've been approached for these kinds of things. One reason I ask is that while it's true that blockchains don't have quote unquote randomness, they have a bunch of entropy in terms of inputs that are coming in, things like the previous block hash, for instance. Or the transaction hash itself. These are, and you combine those two, and maybe and you can really get to a place where it's going to be pretty. It's not, of course, it's not a fully random system, but it's going to be good enough for something like rolling a 6-sided die, or something like that. But it's more to something that I'm interested in how, like on the Oracle side, how does provably random work?
So we are looking into provable randomness at the moment, but I can't really go into it in any more detail than that. And there are obviously randomness data APIs out there as well. So for instance, there are quantum random data, which is even more random than the kind of standard random data, because quantum data is about as random as you can get. But like you said, also block hash is a way of getting a fairly decent source of random data that's incredibly difficult to tamper with. So there are a few different ways you can do it, but yeah, there are ways you can do it from APIs, and there's also a way that we're looking into for verifiable randomness too.
You're talking about APIs not for blockchain, just actual API.
Actual API.
It's out there.
Yeah.
And one other comment, there's also the opportunity to use what Stuart was just talking about for the oracles, these kind of multi-step transactions. If you commit to a transaction involving randomness in one block, and then you kind of finalize your random number source in a later block, then it's much more difficult for that to be tampered with, because not only would you have to have some minor cooperated tampering in the first block, but you're going to have to know what's coming later and be able to control that as well, which starts to ramp up the cost, and could conceivably use some of the same types of structures that we have for cross-chain transfers, multi-step computations, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think for randomness, it's quite a common thing that people need, and what I think is pretty good for that, and what we'd like to work towards, is having a kind of plug and play solution across multiple chains. So that if as a developer you want to create a random dApp on Kadena or a random dApp on a different blockchain, you don't necessarily have to look at how each blockchain implements it individually. There's a standard solution that can be plugged in and used easily. So I think that's the kind of thing. If a developer goes to a blockchain and they automatically know what APIs are going to be there, what sources of randomness will be present, what they can build, then I think it takes a lot of the uncertainty out of exploring new chains. So it's almost like having a pre-existing toolkit for developers across different chains in the ecosystem. And that's something we're kind of building towards as well.
We just got an interesting question. Starts with Solana and Ava. You see it on there?
Yeah, it's already on.
It's something we talk about too, because we have, essentially. So one thing about something like Solana is that Solana's rolls out with the high transactions per second, and Ava, rolls out with their proof of stake, so they have relatively fast finality. But it's important to realize that, moving away from proof of work isn't some magic cure for scalability. And if you want a concrete example of that in action today, look no further than Binance Chain and PancakeSwap, who have started having rising gas prices and congestion, because what real scaling means is that you can scale to any demand. And also the other thing about scaling is it also means that you have to weigh your trade-offs. So interestingly enough, fast finality, which is something that blockchain people think about a lot, is something that doesn't exist in the real world for any significant economic transaction. And if anything, Bitcoin is way too fast. So if you think of something like Visa, sure, Visa can book a payment, but they might back out of that payment as much as 30 days later. Stocks in the US take 3 days to clear. They certainly don't clear in real time. And the important thing to understand is nobody wants them to. Nobody wants things like, it's one thing when you're doing small transactions, and in payments, I think, certain kinds of, blockchain, what I'm trying to say is that Bitcoin is already the fastest payment settlement system in the world, because it actually settles it and it's done in an hour. Well, or longer, because it's not scalable. And that's one of the things we like to say, is that if Bitcoin could scale the way Kadena is scaled, there'd be so much more going on Bitcoin, because it's already fast enough in terms of latency for any settlement task. Kadena today can settle the entire US stock market on a daily basis, easily. And because again, we're talking about settlement. So settlement of stocks, we could come out and say, we could settle in a couple hours, but then, Reg NMS and NASD would be like, whoa, we actually need this stuff to go through all the other systems and make sure that the settlement actually happens. This impacts even things like the Robinhood.
Was just about to mention the same thing.
Yeah, because one of the reasons, intelligent and not so intelligent people differ on why Robinhood might have shut down trades on a particular name. But one reason, a plausible reason, is that actually once you start moving enough stocks, the clearing, the way stocks clear, the DTCC and all these things start coming into play, and they might say to you, you got to slow down. And that's, and Robinhood claims that that is what happened to them. And the only reason to believe them is because it does happen to, I worked at JP Morgan and prime brokerage. Every system you interact with is one that, has ways that they could halt or slow things down because, and in that case, it's because actually the risk present in clearing stocks over 3 days is immense. So if you move enough stuff, you get to the point where you might not be able to clear it, and you could have a credit crisis that affects the entire country. And so I don't think Robinhood was in any danger of doing that. But so the point being is that by building a scalable proof of work, we've established a settlement system that could settle all the world's transactions, but more importantly, do it in a way, with the security POW, which is proven and more secure than proof of stake, more secure than proof of authority, and most importantly, we can. And another interesting thing about Kadena, of course, is that when you add more chains, it actually gets more secure, which is one of the weirdest principles to ever come across. Usually it's like a trade-off where it's like, oh, well, it gets less secure. No, it gets more secure because it gets that much harder to take over the chain when you've got more chains running. So that's, one of the big visions for Kadena is that we're going to be the settlement platform for all blockchains. And that's something that our partner Tokensoft talks about with their wrapped tokens, that they see one day, wrapped is putting tokens everywhere. It's interop for days. But they see one day being able to settle all their positions on the Kadena blockchain.
And just one more comment on the Robinhood aspect. What Robinhood really did was they provided their users an app that covered up the realities of the underlying settlement. And that is the real source of the surprise when all of a sudden that cover up, which I don't mean to make it sound like it's a nefarious thing, but it was in service of a user experience. And it's very clear from Robinhood's success that the user experience was good enough that it attracted a ton of users, which is neat, and it kind of brings new people into the game. But we see that at the end of the day, you can't always cover up the realities of the way the universe works. And so I think when you start cranking up huge transaction throughput claims, you gotta wonder a little bit of hey, what kind of assumptions might we be covering up underneath here, and maybe be on the lookout.
AVA is probabilistic, and Solana also has a completely unproven. These are all brand new consensus mechanisms, and just to give you an idea, consensus. The technologies that Satoshi put together, because he put them together. He didn't invent them. He put them together in his white paper. Took decades to develop. And proof of stake, I think is going to is evolving. But the point being is that in some cases you do have there's a story I like to tell about scaling, which is that how do you scale a stock market? It's easy. You just give every letter its own computer. Right? Done. We've scaled. Well, guess what happens when Apple releases their earnings report? All the volume goes to Apple. And all of a sudden, your entire stock market is only as good as your Apple server. So things that, things like there's a lot of things in blockchain like DAGs. There's a lot of very smart concepts about scaling. Whereas Chainweb takes Nakamoto consensus and just parallelizes it. And that's all it does. So by doing that, we know it works because we didn't do anything that smart. And that's why, and we do these things so that when people run things on Kadena, they're not going to fail. They're not going to have weird consensus bugs. We already saw that, problems on Ava with validation problems, forks. So consensus is no joke. Bitcoin is the most secure system to ever be rolled out. It pioneered the idea of running a highly secure distributed program in the public. So, that's what those are the giants' shoulders that we're standing on.
Just
We're
just jumping in quickly before the hour on the Bitcoin point.
Yeah.
We're actually in hackathon at the moment, so we're sponsoring Sovrathon, which is a hackathon that takes part in the Bitcoin sidechain. That goes on, I think, until the middle of July. And if anyone's interested in testing out API3's tech, then that's probably a good place to start. We've documented everything for it. So there should be links to that from our Medium. And thanks to all the Kadena community for joining us. If any of you would like more information, again, the Medium's a really good source of kind of basic articles, and our white papers on our website, api3.org. But, yeah.
Perfect. So that they've already did the finish. Maybe one more question that we can throw at Stuart and Doug for the finish, because we got this whole proof of stake and proof of work debate going. What is your opinion, just random question, and you don't have to elaborate, we could talk for hours, on Ethereum 2.0? I just want to know out of interest.
I always say
all the time, so I'll give it to Doug.
I always say that if you can't figure out how to scale proof of work, the value of scaling all of this blockchain stuff is so immense that I think any reasonable person would go looking for new ways of making this stuff scale so that it can reach a wider audience. And it just turns out that we've figured out how to scale proof of work. And so that, to me, is where I want to place my bets. But if you kind of presuppose that you haven't figured that out yet, then all of that work is completely understandable. But I think that we haven't seen necessarily all the ramifications of it. And proof of work has had a lot longer to be really tried and figured out. And so that was what attracted me to Kadena and the work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you for that. I want to thank both of you for joining, and also, of course, Dave for joining and answering the API3 side of things. We're going to have our next community call in 2 weeks. As always, you can pre-submit your questions 1 week prior, and the topic is to be determined. We'll keep you updated. Any final words from Doug and Stuart?
Thanks so much for having us. This is great conversation. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, and come join our communities in Kadena. We're rolling out we're rolling out Pact 4 in a week. That's going out to our node upgrades, and that brings all these amazing things like a lot of improvements for transparency, the whole thing of publishing events so that you can, you have this kind of easy to verify record for interop. So, we're not slowing down. There's stuff going on all the time. Come build on Kadena, come join our community, check out KDA. It's a really interesting token. And look out for API3 and Kadena, because we're going to do some great shit.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Stuart. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been really good. Really interesting.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.